Two smug officers stopped an elderly black woman, mocking and humiliating her in front of a crowd, certain she was powerless. They had no idea she was the state's attorney. What happened next shook the entire town. But let's start from the beginning. It was a quiet morning in Oakwood, the kind where you could almost forget the world's ugliness. I was cruising in my old Buick, windows down, enjoying the crisp air. I'd just left the farmer's market with a bag of peaches, the kind you could smell from across the room. Then I saw the flashing blue lights in my rearview mirror. "Great," I muttered, pulling to the shoulder. A young deputy swaggered out of his cruiser like he owned the road. His uniform was too perfect, and his badge gleamed as if he'd just polished it. "License and registration," he barked, not even glancing at me. "Good morning to you too, officer," I said calmly, handing over my papers. He frowned, scanning them. "Expired tags," he snapped. I tilted my head. "That's not possible. I just renewed them last month." "Don't argue, ma'am," he said. "Step out of the vehicle." I raised an eyebrow. "For expired tags?" "Yes, for expired tags," he shot back. "Unless you want this to get more complicated." I sighed and opened the door, stepping out slowly. By then, another officer had pulled up. His partner was older, bulkier, and looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Sergeant Greaves," the older one said, smirking. "And who do we have here? Grandma on her way to bingo?" The younger one chuckled. "She's got expired tags and an attitude." I crossed my arms, my patience thinning. "What's the real problem here, gentlemen? Expired tags don't usually come with backup." Greaves stepped closer, towering over me. "Step aside, ma'am. We're searching your car." "For expired tags?" I asked, incredulous. "You got a problem with that?" I held his gaze. "Actually, I do. You don't have probable cause, and this feels an awful lot like harassment." His face hardened. "Watch your tone." By now, a small crowd had gathered. I noticed phones recording, neighbors whispering to each other. "Listen," the young one said, stepping closer. "Just cooperate, and this will be over quick." But I wasn't about to make it easy for them. Something told me they were looking for trouble, and they'd chosen the wrong target. The tension in the air was thick, the kind that either breaks or explodes. I could feel their frustration simmering, and I knew this encounter was about to spiral. Little did they know, their grandma wasn't the defenseless target they thought. The heat of the midday sun bore down, but it was nothing compared to the fire building inside me. Deputy Tucker was circling my car, shining his flashlight into the windows like he was hunting for buried treasure. His partner, Sergeant Greaves, loomed close by, hands on his hips, a smirk plastered across his face. "We can do this the easy way," Greaves said, his voice laced with fake authority. "Or you can make it difficult for yourself." "Difficult for myself?" I shot back. "I'm not the one escalating a routine stop into a spectacle." His smirk faltered. "Watch your mouth, ma'am." Meanwhile, Tucker had decided to pop my trunk. "Step back," he ordered. "You don't have a warrant," I said firmly, standing my ground. Tucker chuckled. "Warrant, lady? You're in no position to talk about warrants." The crowd on the sidewalk was growing, their murmurs rising like a low tide. Phones were pointed in every direction, catching every move. I saw Mrs. Henderson from 3 doors down, clutching her purse and whispering to her husband. 2 teenagers were openly recording, their expressions a mix of curiosity and outrage. "Let's get this over with," Greaves barked, stepping closer. He grabbed my arm, his grip rough and heavy. "Unhand me," I said, yanking my arm free. "Or do you want to add assault to your growing list of offenses?" That stopped him for a beat. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with, I replied, meeting his glare. Tucker interrupted, holding up a plastic bag he'd found in the trunk. It was filled with peaches, still fragrant from the market. "What's this?" he asked mockingly. "Evidence of breakfast?" I snapped. The crowd laughed nervously, but Greaves wasn't amused. "You think this is funny?" he growled. "We can detain you for obstruction, you know." The moment he said it, I saw the shift in the crowd. Their phones were now aimed squarely at the officers, the murmurs turning into open discontent. "You two might want to think this through," I said calmly. "A lot of eyes are watching, and your actions are looking worse by the minute." Greaves leaned in, close enough for me to smell the stale coffee on his breath. "We don't care about eyes. People like you always play the victim. It's pathetic." That's when I knew. They weren't just targeting me. They thought they'd picked an easy scapegoat. They had no idea the storm they were about to unleash. The officer's smug confidence shattered the moment I pulled my badge from my purse. "Grace Thompson," I said, holding it high. "State's attorney for this district. Care to explain your actions to me now?" Tucker froze mid-step, his face draining of color. Greaves squinted at the badge, then stepped back like it might burn him. We didn't know, ma'am," Tucker stammered. "That much is obvious," I replied sharply. "But you should have thought twice before targeting someone based on their race and age. Unlawful search, harassment, what's next? Assault?" The crowd erupted in murmurs. Phones zoomed in on the badge, capturing every word. "Ma'am, let's talk about this calmly," Greaves said, his voice shaking now. "No, we'll handle this officially," I snapped. "You've abused your authority, and it ends here. Expect to hear from my office." The officers exchanged panicked glances, retreating under the weight of the crowd's growing cheers. As they sped off, I stood tall, my badge still in hand. This wasn't just about me. It was about sending a message. This fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. By the next morning, the footage was everywhere. Headlines screamed, "Corrupt officers target state's attorney. Get exposed in viral video." Social media exploded, with thousands of comments and shares demanding accountability. Calls flooded the sheriff's office. Greaves and Tucker were placed on immediate leave, pending investigation. But for me, this was just the beginning. I held a press conference on the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed as I stood tall, addressing the crowd. "This incident is a symptom of a larger problem, systemic abuse of power. Today, I'm launching a full investigation into misconduct within our law enforcement. It's time for real accountability." The crowd erupted in cheers, reporters shouting questions. Inside, the sheriff's office scrambled to control the damage. Greaves had tried to justify their actions, claiming standard procedure, but the evidence spoke louder. His own colleagues began leaking complaints about his behavior, fueling the fire. A week later, Tucker sent a handwritten apology. "I was wrong," he wrote. "I see that now." Greaves stayed silent, but silence wouldn't save him. The investigation uncovered a pattern of misconduct: racial profiling, excessive force, falsified reports. By the end of the month, several officers were terminated, and new reforms were implemented, including mandatory bias training. For me, the victory was bittersweet. I thought of all the people who didn't have a badge or a viral video to protect them. This was one battle in a war far from over. As I walked back into the courthouse that morning, a young black woman stopped me. "Thank you," she said softly. "You stood up for all of us." I nodded, my resolve strengthening. "We all deserve better," I said, "and I'm not stopping until we get it."